This is Word Skeptic, where mental health literature is dissected. Customers of mental health care deserve a guarantee their treatment won't be conducted by snake oil salesmen. I humbly admit that for most of my life, I was unaware of the pseudoscience and disinformation behind theories of mass memory repression and dissociative identity disorder. In the past, I placed no skepticism towards these ideologies and believed questioning them was an attack on victims of childhood abuse. However, spreading awareness of unscrupulous tactics and ideologies of bad therapy can only strengthen the psychiatric community to find truth for its consumers. Pseudoscience is fraud and should be viewed as such. That's why I'm looking at Satanic Ritual Abuse, Principles of Treatment from 1995 by Dr. Colin Ross. Before tackling a book from 20 years ago, I'd like to help you understand what was going on in our culture at that time. Most know of the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s by cases like the West Memphis 3, where 3 teens were falsely convicted of heinous fatal crimes against small children. What many may not know is that the mental health community was a breeding ground for witch hunts, similar to the case of the West Memphis 3. Richard Webster's book, Why Freud Was Wrong, Sin, Science, and Psychoanalysis, dedicated a chapter to the phenomenon of false memories sparked by therapy. He wrote about feminist writers and therapists who fought for public recognition of sexual abuse through the 70s and 80s, an extremely warranted fight. However, it unintentionally became entrenched with Freudian dogmatic beliefs that traumatic memories could be locked away in the unconscious mind. Webster explained vulnerable women, without reason to believe they had been abused, underwent immense psychological pressure in therapy to produce memories of sexual abuse. Unaware to the therapist, they were using highly coercive forms of therapy and practicing without testing the validity of recovered memory doctrine. With time, bizarre narratives of satanic ritual abuse, alien abduction, and more were also being recovered by therapists. The popularization of recovered memory coercive techniques also led women to believe they had multiple personality disorder, now rebranded as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. This therapy often led women to years of recovered memory-focused sessions that ultimately left their lives ransacked. After patients began filing malpractice lawsuits against their therapist and research began debunking recovered memories, the majority of the scientific community began to recognize that dissociative identity disorder and recovered memories were a patient's experience induced iatrogenically through coercive therapy techniques. Colin Ross, a proponent of DID, wrote Satanic Ritual Abuse in 1995 while recovered memory therapy was on the decline and therapists were being successfully sued for using bad therapeutic techniques that even Ross himself used. Check out the links below to learn more about patient allegations against Ross and the history of how a cocktail of recovered memory therapy and conspiracy theory techniques have unsettling consequences for patients and their loved ones. Within this literature, Ross fights to legitimize a possible reality to satanic cults believed to have murdered babies, sacrificed animals, and induced dissociative identity disorder in children, to use them as minions of satanic deeds. Similar to those fighting to rationalize theories of alien abduction, creationism, and the Illuminati, Ross has no evidence. Ross consistently explains that it doesn't matter if satanic cults are of reality or fantasy, as if fantasy is just as arguably important as reality. Despite the lack of evidence and the growing body of research at that time attributing satanic ritual abuse claims to coercive therapy, Ross's book was intended to outline ways to treat patients reporting they were victims of satanic ritual abuse. He often writes as if he genuinely believes there are intergenerational satanic cults you should be scared of, but then briefly recognizes the lack of evidence to his claims, followed by 3 pages of elaborating further unfounded satanic ritual abuse details as proof. This is reasoning I've come to coin as Colin Ross logic. What would it look like if other doctors practiced with Colin Ross logic? Hey Doc, I have really bad knee pain.
There is no evidence, but I assert that there's a link between knee pain and asthma, and I'm going to prescribe you an inhaler. Alright, how's the inhaler doing?
I've been taking it, but I still have knee pain.
Well, that's good, because you have asthma.
What if doctors use Colin Ross logic as far into the conspiracy theory extremes as Ross himself does? What?
Hi, Doc. I have a pain in my groin.
Oh, well, there's no evidence, but groin pain is linked to haunted testicle. I might have to do an exorcism on your nutsack. Hi. You've been diagnosed with cancer, and there is no evidence, but I think there is a link between cancer and Black Lagoon lung. So I'm going to give you anti-amphibian medication for this ailment. I kept questioning Ross's intention. Did he write this book with a genuine intent of helping people, or does his indulgence in conspiracy theories only create more problems within patients? I can only speculate if Ross himself uses Colin Ross logic in his own practice. He poses a long-winded conspiracy theory statement, then states briefly that there is no evidence to support it, and then continues to elaborate further as if it is in fact evidence for the conspiracy theory. The circle of logic continues to spiral on forever. Ross asserts he takes a neutral stance on the idea satanic ritual abuse, but really, he's trying his hardest to rationalize the irrational. He claims satanic cults could be a multi-billion-dollar industry, relating it to the Korean cult, the Unification Church. He explains that 2 members of this cult owned the Washington Times and were involved in a Korean coup. He randomly throws in a fun fact that President Reagan's favorite newspaper was the Washington Times, asserting how peculiar of a coincidence this was. Silly loose associations between Korean coups and the cult money-making business aside, Ross actually made an executive choice to throw in 2 sentences hinting at Reagan's link, liking a newspaper, to a coup in a book for mental health professionals. Obama's favorite ice cream is Bluebell. Isn't it suspicious that Obama's delicious treat of choice would poison citizens of Texas, the state he never won? Just as any folklore or conspiracy theorist appropriates historical events to fit their narrative, Colin Ross embarrassingly does too. Elizabeth Loftus, career memory researcher, wrote the afterword to this book and received a lot of flack from the scientific community for it. Nonetheless, Loftus thoroughly and respectfully tore Ross's ideological basis to shreds. She commented on Ross's cherry-picking historical facts by saying, Ross spends considerable time trying to convince his readers of the likelihood of satanic ritual abuse through his discussion of real-life evil. But just because the Catholic Inquisition took place and Nazi Germany existed is not proof that there are vast numbers of intergenerational satanic cults engaging in ritual abuse. Animal sacrifice, baby breeding, baby sacrifice. The failure of law enforcement to document even one of these is an important piece of the puzzle, despite Ross's protestations to the contrary. Damn straight, Elizabeth Loftus. Expecting the generic theist ideologies that claim satanic ritual abuse are true acts from Satan himself, Ross doesn't go there. He actually takes a pretty secular stance attributing ideas of Satan and God to the human psyche. Despite his secular-ish stance, his digressions seem to use indoctrination tactics much like theistic religions do. For example, Ross asserts that since there is a possibility of satanic ritual abuse, he chooses to treat satanic ritual abuse by default because it might be real. Statements such as, hell may be real, so I believe in God, are not far off from Ross's claiming there might be organized satanic ritual abuse cults. Therefore, I treat patients as if they've been ritually abused by a cult. Fear-mongering in religion leads people to indoctrination of supernatural beliefs, much like Ross fear-mongers to justify his practices spawned from satanic panic and irrational Freudian ideologies. Ross explains in his book how satanic cults adhere to 5 destructive methods against their victims. But what's compelling is that the methods described sound quite similar to what retractors report as experienced through DID and recovered memory therapy. 1. Deceptive recruitment.
Because I had seizures and blackouts, my therapist felt that I might be suffering from dissociative disorders.
She asked me what I did when I was under a lot of stress, and I said to her that I usually just switch to autopilot and keep on going. And she said that she had met this psychiatrist who she'd always wanted to work with, and she'd like me to take me to go and see him with her. And she said that he was an expert in multiple personality disorder.
Family counseling is what she sought. Treatment for MPD is what she got.
2. Love bombing.
Dr. Braun often treated me like his star patient.
We were always being told we were the pioneers. We were on the cutting edge of this.
3. Isolation from families and friends.
I did detach from my family because a therapist told me that the only way that I could work through my issues is not to have interference from my family.
None of her friends could have contact. We couldn't talk to her, she couldn't talk to us. This was the doctor's orders.
Everyone that I knew detached from someone, whether it be their parents or their husbands or their kids even.
And that was the big threat that they used against you, both therapists. We're the only thing you have. We're your support system.
4. Obedience through a hierarchical organization.
I said to Dale, like, don't you think that's odd? Like, no one's getting better, and everyone wants to kill themselves after they meet you and are in therapy. I said, well, they're in denial, and they have abusive relationships, and they're not well. And, you know, the personalities don't want them to do this work, and so they'd rather die.
I had no way to test my reality. There were a lot of nurses and things that I went to and I said, you know, is this reality? And they all reinforced, yes, it was, you know, that I was really in the best of care.
So he said, if you quit multiple personality disorder therapy, when you die, you'll have multiple personalities in heaven.
And when I would question the therapist and say, I don't think this is real, I'm so confused, they would say, well, who's the author of confusion? Satan. And there you know, so there you're sucked back in again.
5. A charismatic leader.
Because I know those things, I know in my heart that those things didn't happen. But I just felt the pressure from the therapists.
He would always explain it. And I would think, oh, okay, you know, he'd always have an answer.
He was the expert.
Right.
I mean, how am I going to argue with that? It didn't sound right to me, but he was the expert.
Ross self-identifies as someone who truly listens to his patients, a statement commonly made by DID and recovered memory therapists. However, he doesn't believe patients when they retract their narrative of DID and satanic ritual abuse. His reasoning for this convenient moment of skepticism is that a retraction is symbolic evidence that the patient was in fact ritually abused. Damn to DID if you do, and damn to it if you don't. Is this an example of Ross evading responsibility for iatrogenically inducing these disorders? I guess we will never know. But it is not unbelievable to think that Ross might have only written this book to legitimize his practices founded in junk science and supernatural claims. Ross is still a proponent of DID to this day, and even goes to conferences preaching the gospel of DID. Unfortunately for Ross, it doesn't take a scientist to identify flawed methods and ideology. Thanks for watching, and remember to keep a critical eye. The cognition of being bad is held by the persecutor personalities, who believe that children or the host caused the abuse and deserve to be punished further. The persecutors act out this cognition on the skin of the host personality through cutting and burning. The natural tendency of the organism to protect itself then gives rise to protector personalities, some of whom are classified by therapists as internal self-helpers.
I understand what he's trying to get to at that.
Yeah, but how does that translate into an actual therapy session?
Every time you cut, you're working on trying to keep the body safe.